President Trump, just a few minutes ago, as we went to air here on PBS, commuted the sentence for Roger Stone, his longtime confidant and political advisor. I've covered him for a decade. That's according to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and a statement just out from the White House. We wanted to make sure that was all nailed down before we shared it with you. Mr. Stone was convicted of lying to Congress and witness tampering amid a federal probe into Russian interference in the 2016 election. He was scheduled to report to prison next week to serve a sentence of more than 3 years. Yamiche, why tonight, and what are the political implications?
The question of the political implications is, I think, one that we're not going to know for a long time. The president has been able to do things that are legally controversial and still not pay, I think, a big price in terms of his base not supporting him. But why now is really the question that a lot of people are thinking about, and it's because he didn't want Roger Stone, at least according to the statement out by the White House press secretary, he didn't want Roger Stone to serve any jail time. And he also has been saying over and over again all week that he thinks Roger Stone was treated unfairly, that he was a victim of a witch hunt, that this was really about getting back at him. He also talked about the fact today on the White House lawn, President Trump, that is, he talked about the fact that he feels like Roger Stone was being penalized while other people who were dubious, like he said, Vice President Joe Biden and even former President Barack Obama, that they, and even, of course, FBI Director James Comey, that they are more guilty of things, of perceived wrongs than Roger Stone. Of course, there is no evidence that any of those men broke the law in any way. There is evidence that Roger Stone broke the law. But what the president's doing here is really underlying the fact that he's willing to use his presidential powers to help his friends, to help people who are close to him. In this case, Roger Stone is someone who is very close to the president. He's someone who has all sorts of lessons for the president that you see enacted and played out every day from the president, including the fact that all press, whether it's bad or good, it's still good press because it keeps your name up there and people talking about you. So I think this is a really, I think, an interesting commutation on the president's part, but it's not surprising because the president had been hinting at this all week.
Eamon, I know you were just checking in with your sources. It's breaking news. Are you detecting any divide inside the West Wing about this decision by the President Trump during the middle of election season, campaign season?
Not yet. The news has just been out in a couple of minutes, but I'm struggling to get my arms around this one, right? I mean, I don't think we've ever seen a president use the pardon power so directly to benefit a political ally of himself. And remember what Roger Stone was doing in his lying to Congress and obstruction of justice that he was set to be sent to prison for was protecting Roger Stone, but also protecting the president. So there's an enormous percentage of the American public that's going to look at this and say, this is political payback for a guy taking the bullet here to protect a president of the United States. What's interesting is this president is doing it before the election. We've seen pardons in the past that have seemed sleazy to a lot of people in the country. The Bill Clinton pardon of Mark Rich comes to mind. That was done after the election, just hours before the president was set to leave office, and he wouldn't pay any political price for it. This president is doing it in a hot political summer ahead of a narrow re-election fight, and we have no way of gaming out at this point just how that's going to play. As Yamiche said, the president has done a lot of things over the years that his base has forgiven or tolerated or embraced even. We'll see whether this one causes them to swallow hard or whether this is just another example of President Trump being able to do things that ordinary politicians could not get away with.
Cleve, you're down there in Florida, and you covered the Biden campaign for the Post. What does this mean for the Biden campaign? Do they change and pivot a little bit to run against the president as someone who pardons too much? He gave a big speech this week on his economic plan, trying to counter the president's populist economic pitch, bring it back to the Democrats. Does this Roger Stone decision change their calculus based on your conversations in recent days when the possibility was hovering out there?
Sure. I think they're probably asking the same question that you're asking, like what to do and how does that change? You know, one of the things that Biden has been doing over the last couple of days with the economic plan is pivoting from not just talking ill or speaking ill of Trump. He's been really doing that for more than a year. Part of it is him saying, America, here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to bring to the table. And, you know, obviously they felt a very strong need to do that at this moment before, you know, whatever convention, as as coronavirus is heating up, we wonder if there is going to be a switch, if there is going to be a pivot. Biden did put out a statement earlier today talking about coronavirus, but also, the Venezuelan president as Trump prepared to come to Florida. But, one of the biggest questions they're going to face is, do you stay the course? Do you put Biden out there and explain who he is, or do you just attack Trump?
Paula, I wanted to give you time to send some text messages. Jump in here.
Absolutely. One of the most significant things here to me is just 2 days ago, the president's attorney general, William Barr, one of his most loyal advisors, said that he believed Roger Stone's sentence was fair. And I asked the president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is it appropriate for the president to grant clemency to his longtime friend when even his own loyal attorney general says the sentence was fair? Now, Meadows defended the president, noting that his clemency power is absolute. That is effectively true. But again, it'll be interesting to see if there are any political consequences to this decision, because once again, it draws attention to how many of the president's close associates have either been convicted or pleaded guilty during his time in office.
Yamiche, that's such an interesting point from Paula, because this book by Mary Trump, the president's niece, has been a big story this week about the president's psyche. And my own reporting on Mr. Stone and President Trump over the years, they were very close politically for decades. He is someone who has been at the president's side through ups and downs, and that there probably wasn't so much of a political calculation here, but this was a personal decision for President Trump to protect a friend, to help a friend, perhaps.
You can see it in two ways. They obviously have a personal relationship. President Trump has known Roger Stone for years and years and years. But there's also a political calculation there. As Eamon noted, there's this idea that Roger Stone might be seen as taking a bullet for the president, so that the president is also benefiting from this commutation of Roger Stone's sentence. So in some ways, people could see it as the president making sure that Roger Stone continues to be loyal to him. But I think there is, of course, the personal aspect of this. The president has talked about the fact that he is friends with Roger Stone, that he feels like Roger Stone was not treated fairly and he was targeted because of his relationship with the president. So there could be both of those things going on. But I think the real question here is, what is Joe Biden going to do? I think that was a smart question for you to ask. And I think we're going to have to sit and wait and see if Joe Biden latches onto this, or if he continues to talk about the thing that most Americans are thinking about in their everyday lives, which is, of course, the coronavirus, and it is the ability of the country to get past this virus and the handling that President Trump has done thus far and in the months to come.
So, Cleve, this is a campaign shaping up to be about power. It's also shaping up to be a campaign on race and culture. The president began the week with his tweets on Bubba Wallace, defending the use of the Confederate flag. You've been to the villages in Florida where that racist chant was uttered that President Trump tweeted, then deleted. How is race and culture playing on the ground in Florida?
Sure. One of the things that I saw at the villages was not necessarily people changing, but there's an intensification, right? I talked with the leader of the Democratic Club at the villages, and one of the things she said was she doesn't believe that anybody on either side was swayed by what happened, right? The Republican members aren't swayed by what the Democrats said, but people are feeling more of a need to speak their mind, to do whatever they can. I talked to a guy who is spending his retirement in a golf cart at the villages with anti-Trump signs up, all day, every day, because now he feels this just strong need to try to persuade someone, anyone. And yes, that means that he's gotten into a few verbal and occasional physical fights. But at the same time, this is how he sort of feels that need within himself. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing at the villages, which is supposed to be this sort of sleepy retirement village, right? But instead, you're seeing people getting into really heated arguments and exchanges, sometimes with racist overtones, just about this election.
Yamiche, any thoughts on that?
I think as someone who's a native of Florida, I'm very familiar with the villages. My last reporting trip down to the villages and down to Florida, I was talking to a group of senior citizens who were Trump supporters, and they were talking about the fact that really they liked his economy and they liked what he was doing with all the different policies that he was passing. But then when we started talking about immigration, they said, well, those people, they're probably diseased. They don't need to be here. And by the way, Puerto Rico, it probably shouldn't be a state. And what you saw there was really a veiled part of racism. It's the idea that these can be friendly people and that we were having a pretty friendly conversation, but they felt the need to say that they thought immigrants and Hispanic people were somehow a detriment to this country. And I think that we can have political differences, but if you're targeting one group of people and saying those people are bad, that is completely racism. And I think the president can't help himself in some ways. He continues to dig in on culture wars. He continues to dig in on the racial divisions in this country. America had racial problems long before President Trump came along, but now that he's here, he's not at all shying away from the fact that he thinks that running and using racist terms and using racist language and sending racist tweets, he thinks that helps him politically. We'll have to see in November if that actually is the case.
Eamon, what about on the economy, the big Biden speech? Does the White House see Mr. Biden cutting into their territory?
Yeah, well, you saw the president suggesting that Biden had plagiarized from him. And look, I mean, if you look at this from the Biden camp's perspective, the president's poll numbers really did not move for the first 3 years of his presidency. He had sort of rock-solid base support all through all of the scandal and impeachment of the president, a lot of Russia talk and investigation. Where the president's numbers started to move were on the coronavirus and the economic wipeout that we saw earlier this year. And now you see Biden ahead of the president in a lot of the polling, and including in our CNBC polling in battleground states. If you're the Biden campaign, you're going to take some notice of that and stick with the messaging around the virus and the economy, those things that really matter to Americans, their health and their economic well-being, and leave the scandal stuff aside. You can kind of hit it on the cable talk shows from time to time, but the meat and potatoes of the Biden campaign is likely, I think, still to be about the virus and the economy and what it means for the average American voter who's out there trying to figure out how to live their lives. I mean, this is a national convulsion over the past couple of months like we've never seen before in American history. And it's difficult to say how it's going to play out, but the consequences of it are going to be extreme and long-lasting, and people are concerned about that. And I think that's what this election is going to be all about, front and center, is the economy and people's health.
And the courts are always going to be a big part of it, Paula. The president has been lashing out about the Supreme Court's decision to allow Cyrus Vance in Manhattan, the prosecutor there, to use the president's tax returns and survey them as part of his investigation. What's the latest on that front inside the White House?
Well, this was clearly a statement on the limits of presidential power. You saw the president lashing out, suggesting that this was unfair. But in speaking to his attorneys, they take a more measured approach. They think that in the short term, they can win and that they can play this out until past the election. They tell me that they are going to continue to litigate some of these issues. The Supreme Court left the door open for them to do that. They will continue to do this through the election, and that's significant because even though they're unlikely to prevail, since most of their arguments failed at the Supreme Court, if they do eventually have to pass off these documents to the grand jury in New York, it will likely happen after the election. And when materials go to a grand jury, they're not necessarily released to the public. They only become public if someone is charged and there's a trial and those documents are presented as evidence in a trial. So even though the president is extremely upset, his lawyers, they'll take it.